I'm Richard Boogs, licensed clinical psychologist and a faculty member here at the California Institute of Integral Studies. I'm going to speak for a few minutes on mental health, gun epidemic, violence in this country, and is there a way we might be able to predict who the next mass shooter might be. As a mental health professional, I spend a good bit of time educating and treating people who suffer from a variety of mental illness. In this country, approximately 20% of people seek out a mental health professional for a variety of conditions, including depression and anxiety, obsessional thinking, problems with sleep, oftentimes relationship issues or obsessional thinking, a variety of things. 20%. Other mental health conditions, though, like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, are disorders of the brain and tend to run in families. Schizophrenia, for example, affects approximately 1% of the population and causes individuals to feel like they have a lack of touch with reality, including hearing voices that other people don't hear, as well as believing other people are reading their minds, controlling their thoughts, or plotting to harm them. This can be extremely terrifying for people and make them feel withdrawn and agitated. Fortunately, we live in a time where there's very good medication and treatment available to make this condition more manageable. Bipolar disorder, on the other hand, is also a brain disorder and affects mood, energy, activity levels, and the ability to carry out day-to-day tasks. Symptoms are severe and can result in damaged relationships, poor job or school performance, as well as suicide. But we have to keep in mind that most people diagnosed with mental illness are not violent. In fact, only 3 to 5% of gun violence committed in this country is by people with mental illness. Mass shootings, on the other hand, do make up the majority of gun crimes in America, though they have a stronger link to untreated mental health issues than other types of gun violence. For example, the recent shooting at the Naval Yard in Washington is an example of a man who actually had a fair amount of contact with law enforcement prior to the shooting. He had contacted a month before the police to say that he had to change his hotel room 3 times because people were following him and listening to him and trying to control his thoughts. Just days before, he killed 12 people with a pump-action shotgun, which he obtained legally. He said that people were harassing him and following him with a microwave and trying to hurt him. So clearly the mental health system failed in this case of a man who really reached out saying, "I'm in trouble, I need help." So there have been 62 mass shootings since 1962. In the United States now, tragically, that's 1 shooting per month. Acute paranoia, delusions, depression are rampant among the perpetrators of these crimes. At least 36 of these killers committed suicide on or near the scene. Another 7 died by what's called suicide by cop, forcing the police to shoot them. Serious mental health illnesses were also implicated in the perpetrators at Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, Aurora, Tucson. But again, I want to remind you that only 3 to 5% of violent crimes are committed by people with serious mental illness, though these shocking tragedies and the unthinkable cause and harm it has done to families gets our attention, as it should. But what do we know about these mass murderers? One thing that forensic psychologists and the FBI are trying to understand is there a profile? What we do know that 96% of them are male, and since 1982, all Caucasian. Prior to this time, there was the association to black males in urban areas committing these crimes, but now it is Caucasian males in affluent and suburban areas like Newtown. Many of these are not psychotic people, meaning they don't hear voices, they are not under the influence of some kind of a severe mental illness. More often they are depressed, they are frustrated with their lives, they may suffer from paranoia, they may have a feeling of jealousy or revenge, they may have a variety of other acute behavioral personality disorders. And oftentimes they externalize responsibility for their situation on others. They feel justified or somehow entitled to act out on other people. Sometimes they've experienced catastrophic loss, terminal illness. Other times they are just psychopathic callous, manipulative, and unfeeling. When preparing to do this, it was actually easier to imagine being a victim of one of these individuals rather than in the mind of one of these people. We can't really comprehend the torment, the suffering, the ability to carry out such a heinous, unthinkable tragedy. But many of these people, looking at the profiles, were social misfits, or they were angry loners. Some of them were just tipped over into an uncontrollable rage by something that happened situationally in their life. They might have felt victimized or entitled to take action. Some of them sought publicity as part of why they did this. We can't talk to many of them because most of them end up dead. It's very different than the serial killer that the police can spend a lot of time interrogating, come to understand much more about their family background and much more about the events leading up to the massacre. These individuals also tend to be obsessed with guns, oftentimes violent video games, violent movies. In retrospect, investigators uncover warning signs. Sometimes they tried to recruit others to join them, or they really wanted people to know by saying something blatant like, I'm going to get a gun and come back and kill you, and though it was heard but not taken seriously. School shooters, on the other hand, oftentimes harbor anger and paranoid delusions. They have low self-esteem. Sometimes they hang out with other kind of misfits or outcast groups. Oftentimes there's a triggering event, a loss of the job or a problem in a relationship that kind of sets them over the edge and causes them to snap. Killers often exhibit risk factors that are generally tied to criminality, like the history of abuse or ineffective parenting. Some of them have had a tendency to set fires or hurt animals. Again, they're trying to get a profile, because what we want to do is try to predict. And our brains really are wired to try to find a pattern so that we can understand how can we prevent this. But what I'm saying is we can't find a particular profile that will allow us to do that. We have lots of characteristics where there's a sadism that these men have experienced as children, being the receiving end of this. But then we take the men who killed in Columbine, and they had lovely parents, and for the most part they couldn't find anything that was ineffective about their parenting. Let's talk for a minute about the other 95 to 97% of gun violence in this country, because I think it's really important to keep track of the fact that a lot of this is gang-related activity or related to drugs, domestic violence, issues like poverty, education, substance abuse, trouble with anger. I mean, these all contribute to this. And if you think about, we live in a country where there are 330 million guns. That's a gun for every man, woman, and child in this country. Yet only 35% of the population has these guns. We can start to think about the magnitude of what we're trying to do and try to interrupt and prevent some of these massacres from happening. We look for patterns in profiles, but the reality is we're not that good at predicting. When it comes to anticipating physical violence, we're better at identifying overall risk factors such as substance abuse, prior history of violence, lack of social support, current stressors, than on an individual's specific probability. We're just not that good on trying to identify an individual who's going to do this. I mean, clearly with the millions of people who watch violent video games, very, very few of them would ever think about taking that as a guide for their own life and actually acting out that way. We do know that there's quite a stigma attached to mental illness, which causes a lot of people to not seek treatment. This is unfortunate in this country because mental illness, mental health, mental wellness is all part of a larger picture in this country around how it is that people can or cannot seek services and how we cannot be able to identify people who really need support. So in closing, I want us to think about the importance of knowledge, training, practice, engagement, being mindful of others, looking for identifying signs that somebody may be under an especially large amount of stress, somebody in the workplace who seems to have pressured speech or speaking really loudly or is behaving impulsively, also someone who may have access to a firearm. These are the kinds of things that I think we would do a service by reporting to the employee assistance program, to the school principal, someone that we're concerned, that we care. And better to err on the side of reporting something that doesn't happen than to look back and say, oh, we saw the warning signs. You know, the young fella in Virginia Tech, you know, he was having a hard time. People were comfortably in classes with him. People said that he was behaving strangely, aggressively. People didn't want to be near him. And so in that isolation, he was able to, again, legally get a gun and cause a massacre. Thank you.